I'm here with Dr. Phil Zimbardo at his home in San Francisco. Phil is one of the most prominent figures who shaped modern psychology as we know it today for the past 50 plus years. So he's basically impossible to introduce properly, so I will not even attempt to do that. And we'll be talking about good and evil, about time perspectives, about inner peace, about compassion, about motorcycles, and a lot of other interesting things. So, Phil, thank you for taking the time to talk.
Thank you, Ryan. It's great to share some ideas with you.
So I want to start by asking you about good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a topic that you will probably be the most qualified person on the planet to answer. Mm-hmm. You started about 40 years ago with the famous Stanford prison experiment. You've been an expert witness at the Abu Ghraib trials and you wrote about it as well. Right. And I think you were also the president of the American Psychologists Association during 9/11. So that was not it was a random thing, but that happened as well. And I want to kind of ask you to try to boil down all these decades of experience into answering a very simple question. People have intuitively the notion that some people are evil or toxic, and you should just stay away from them and they cannot be changed. And of course there's the famous debate about the situation that manifests that behavior or evokes it. So is it true, I guess? Are some people really inherently evil and you should just stay away from?
Yeah, I think for me the key word is inherently. That my orientation has been, it really started when I was a kid. I grew up in the ghetto in the South Bronx in New York. And if you grew up in the inner city, regardless of your background, regardless of your race, religion, you're surrounded by evil, by drugs, by corruption, by gangs, by prostitution. And the temptation is always there because it's always easy money. And evil is fascinating. Evil is different. Evil is strange. So the devil is more interesting to most people than God is, because the devil is wily, and that's why, in fact, in psychology, there's a huge body of research which can really be fit under evil. I mean, antisocial behavior and aggression and violence. And there's very little research on heroism. Actually, there's very little research on good and a lot on the bad. My orientation is that people are born with this incredible brain that gives rise to even more incredible mind that gives us the potential to do anything that's imaginable. So we have the mental templates for good and evil to make some of us caring, others indifferent, make some of us creative, others destructive. And it pushes some of us to be villains, to do bad things much of our life. But that same mind does the opposite. It pushes some of us to be heroes. That is, putting our best selves forward in service to humanity. Now, my orientation, again, coming from this background in New York, was that I had friends who were good kids who went bad. And even as a little kid, before I even thought about being a psychologist, I wondered, what went wrong? And I wanted to believe that it was not something in them. I wanted to believe that if the situation were changed, they wouldn't have done the bad thing. See, but if you grow up rich, if you grow up privileged, you look around, you see success. Your father's got a great job, your mother's in a country club, whatever, and you want to believe it's in your genes. So I think poor people, immigrants, minority people in general are situationists, because it's the only thing that makes sense. You say, if the situation would change, life would be better for us.
But I know that in your own life story, you've mentioned many times, moving to California and back, and your experience at Yale between the kids who came from prep school and grade school and public schools.
Yeah, it's a difference of privilege. In a sad way, being privileged denies you access to some of the more interesting aspects of life, because you lead your life, with safety and security. You never have to learn about hustlers and wheeler dealers and influence agents. But essentially, when I became a psychologist, I transformed this childhood orientation into becoming what's called a situationist. That is to say, clearly, all of psychology is about scientific study of the behavior of individuals. This is what all of clinical psychology is: personality psychology, cognitive psychology, neuropsychology, is all about the person. And of course, people are the actors on the stage of life, but you're never alone. There are always other actors. It depends on how you're dressed, depends on what role you're playing, depends on who's doing the stagecraft, depends on the props. So essentially, social psychologists like me say, hey, of course we begin with what does the person bring into any situation. Genes matter, personality matters, your habits matter, your response tendency, but that's not enough to understand, to enable me to predict your behavior. I have to know what is the social context in which we're going to put you. I'm going to observe your behavior, decide, I'm going to give you a chance to be good or evil. And so you mentioned the Stanford Prison Experiment. That was really a unique demonstration, almost like a Greek play. What happens when you put good people in a bad place? Does the goodness of the people dominate and change the bad place? Or does a bad place, does evil corrupt good people? And so essentially we're pitting really good and evil, good people in an evil place. Now, and the evil place was a simulated prison in the basement of the psychology department at Stanford. Well, people say, well, why don't you just go study prison? Well, there the problem is it's confounded. You have bad people. Many of the prisoners, are bad people. And some of the guards are failures in the police department, military. So there you have a mix of good and bad people populating it in a bad environment. And the sad conclusion of the Stanford Prison Study, which is the same conclusion as Stanley Milgram's blind obedience to authority, is situations dominate in ways that we never fully appreciate, that it's the majority of people who succumb. When you put good apples in a bad barrel, you know what? The barrel wins. You take a sweet cucumber and you put it in a vinegar barrel. The sweet cucumber says, I'm going to stay sweet.
Right.
You're going to become a pickle. There's no choice. But the key is, it's the majority. In the Milgram experiments, 2/3 go all the way, shocking an innocent person. In the Stanford Prison Study, it was most of the guards who were cruel and abusive. However, in all those situations, there's always a small number who resist, defy unjust authority, rebel. And those people we can consider heroes.
And there's a subtle point I want to get to, because you mentioned two interesting things to me. One is that growing up privilege denies you of a few things. And the other one is that only a small number of people act as heroes. And I wonder if you think the two things are tied in the following way. So it's kind of, I'm not sure I'll be able to explain it well, but I'll try. One thing that I observed during the past few weeks when I was on the road was the value of challenge. When you go out of your comfort zone and you're constantly being in situations where you're being uncomfortable and challenged and have to face a difficulty, it forces you to make decisions. And when you repeatedly are forced to make those decisions, it becomes a skill.
Good, yeah.
So when you do need to act in the future, you have that past skill already of, oh, I've been there, done that, I know what to do, and it's much easier to act in those difficult situations.
Right.
And that's kind of a big insight for me, that
Absolutely.
in a way it's being comfortable, and I think in today's society it became a value.
Right.
To become comfortable and not to face too many challenges actually denies you of important life skills. Maybe one of them is being...
Well, that's interesting. Well, see, I guess I would reframe it is that for most of us, we arrange our lives so that every day is like yesterday. It's if you have the ability, the resources to lead a secure, stable life where there's not daily challenges, you're not, again, if you grow up in the inner city, if you grow up poor, every day is a challenge for survival.
Exactly.
The most extreme is people are homeless. You wake up every day and how am I going to get through from morning to night with no money, with no food? But but other people who are less privileged, each day is a challenge. And so for most of us, most of the time, every day is really like yesterday, meaning we know nothing about ourselves. So if I want to know about you, all I have to say is what you do yesterday, and I'm going to predict what you're going to do tomorrow.
Right.
Well, because that is your comfort zone. So when you purposely put yourself in a totally new situation, get on a motorcycle and ride across the country every day, you have to learn something new. Your bike breaks down, you meet some interesting person, somebody steals your camera or your credit card, whatever.
Right.
And so it's constantly adjusting to something new. And so essentially, you're always out of your comfort zone, and that's the point at which you learn who you are. And essentially, the Stanford Prison Experiment, the Milgram study, many of the experiments in social psychology put people in new situations. College students have never been prison guards. They have never been prisoners. They have never been a teacher who has power to harm their student.
Right.
And so essentially, in that situation, they're trying to rely on what they know in the past, but it's not working. So what's interesting about those studies, it's really character transformation, under intense pressure of the moment. The Milgram study is 50 minutes. The Stanford Prison study, it's day after day, but it's every guard shift.
Yes.
Prisoners have to adjust. Now what do I do with these 3 new guards? Once you adjust to those 3, there's another 3 guards coming on the night shift. And so essentially what these experiments do is it forces people to, if you will, get out of their comfort zone and live on the edge. And so essentially, when you ask somebody, suppose you were a guard in a prison study, would you have abused a prisoner? Suppose you were in the Milgram study, would you have gone all the way? People
Most
say
people
no.
say no?
No.
Yeah.
Well, you say no because never in your life have you done this. So you say, how do I predict my behavior? I use my past behavior to predict the future. Instead of saying, what is the base rate in that study? If I tell you 2/3 went all the way, that is your best predictor. It's the base rate. It's what the average person does. But we all say, well, I'm not average.
Right.
You are average until proven otherwise.